The great chamber floated in the darkness of space, a massive station built from metals that humanity had never seen and powered by energy sources that human scientists could only dream about. This was the Hall of Judgment, the place where the 12 most powerful empires in the galaxy gathered to decide the fate of entire worlds. And today, they had come together to discuss a small blue planet called Earth. Ambassador Zerith of the Velkari Dominion stood at the center of the chamber, his crystalline body catching the light from 1,000 holographic displays that surrounded him. He was tall, nearly 3 meters in height, and his form was made of living crystal that shifted colors with his emotions. And right now, those colors swirled with amusement and contempt as he studied the images of humanity that floated before him. "Look at them," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber like wind chimes in a storm. "These creatures call themselves intelligent, yet they can't even agree on how to govern their own planet. They have hundreds of nations, thousands of languages, and they spend most of their time fighting each other over resources they could easily share." The other ambassadors watched the displays with varying degrees of interest. There was High Sovereign Tiores of the Kethmari Collective, a massive insectoid being whose compound eyes reflected the blue glow of Earth's oceans. And beside him sat the neural cluster known as Synthesis Prime, representative of the machine intelligence called the Synthex Hegemony. And around them gathered 9 other beings from 9 other empires, each one ancient, each one powerful, each one looking at humanity with something between curiosity and disdain. "Their physical forms are remarkably fragile," observed Synthesis Prime, its voice emerging from speakers embedded in its floating metallic shell. "They require constant intake of organic matter and liquid. They must rest for approximately 1/3 of their existence, and their bodies fail completely after less than 100 of their planetary rotations around their star. By any logical measure, they are among the weakest sentient species we have ever catalogued." Zerith gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show human history. Wars played out in rapid succession, millions dying in conflicts over land and ideology and resources. And the ambassador laughed as he watched, a sound like breaking glass that made even some of his fellow delegates uncomfortable. "They are not merely weak in body," Zerith declared. "They are weak in spirit as well. Look how they destroy each other, how they poison their own world, how they waste their short lives in meaningless struggles. They have had the capability to travel beyond their planet for nearly a century of their time, yet they have barely scratched the surface of their own moon. This is not a species destined for greatness. This is a species waiting to be harvested." The word hung in the air like a death sentence, because that is exactly what it was. In the language of the Galactic Conclave, harvesting meant the complete exploitation of a world and its inhabitants. The stripping of resources, the enslavement of the population, the absorption of everything useful into the vast machinery of the 12 empires. "I move that we declare Earth a harvest world," Zerith continued, his crystal form now glowing with a deep red color that indicated satisfaction. "Their technology is primitive, but their planet is rich. Their bodies are weak, but they can serve as laborers in our mines and factories. Their minds are limited, but they can be trained for simple tasks. I see no reason to offer them integration into the Conclave as equals when they are so clearly beneath us." High Sovereign Trax clicked his mandibles thoughtfully, his multiple arms folding and unfolding in patterns that indicated deep consideration. The Kethmari were ancient, older even than the Volcari, and they had seen thousands of species rise and fall across the millennia. "The humans are indeed primitive," Trax agreed, his voice a series of clicks and whistles translated by the chamber systems. "But I wonder if we should study them further before making such a decision. There is something about their persistence that intrigues me. They have survived catastrophes that would have ended most young species, and they continue to grow despite their internal conflicts. Persistence is not strength. Xyrith countered dismissively. A virus persists, a weed persists, but we do not call them powerful. The humans persist because they breed quickly and die easily. They are a quantity species, not a quality species, and the galaxy has no need for more mediocrity. One by one, the other ambassadors voiced their opinions, and one by one they sided with Xyrith. The humans were too primitive, too divided, too weak to be considered worthy of joining the conclave as partners. They would serve better as servants, as resources, as another conquered species added to the long list of worlds that had fallen. Under the dominion of the 12 empires, the vote was unanimous. Xyrith's crystal form blazed with triumphant light as he activated communication, a ray that would broadcast their decision to Earth. In a few moments, the humans would learn their fate, and the ambassador expected terror, panic, perhaps some futile attempt at negotiation. He had seen it before with other species. The desperate pleas, the offers of submission, the gradual acceptance of their new place in the galactic order. The message was sent on every frequency that human technology could receive. It appeared on television screens and computer monitors and mobile devices across the planet, interrupting regular broadcasts with the image of Xyrith standing tall and terrible against the backdrop of the galactic conclave, people of Earth. The translation systems converted his words into every human language simultaneously. You have been judged by the galactic conclave and found wanting. Your species is weak. Your civilization is primitive, and your world has been designated for harvesting. Resistance is not advised. Your technology cannot match ours. Your weapons cannot harm us, and your numbers mean nothing against our power. Prepare to receive our forces within the next cycle of your planet's rotation. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. Xyrith ended the transmission and turned to his fellow ambassadors with a satisfied expression. Around him, the other delegates were already making plans, dividing Earth's resources among themselves, calculating how many human laborers each empire would receive. They waited for a response from Earth, expecting silence or screaming, or perhaps some pathetic attempt at diplomacy. What they received instead was a single transmission, broadcast from every human installation, capable of reaching space, unified in a way that the divided species had never been unified before. The message was short, just 5 words, delivered in a calm voice that carried no fear, no panic, no desperation. You have made a mistake. Xyrith stared at the communication console, his crystal form flickering with colors he could not control. Around him, the other ambassadors exchanged uncertain glances, and for the first time in thousands of years, the Hall of Judgment was completely silent. The humans had been given a death sentence, and their response was not terror but warning, somewhere deep in his ancient crystalline mind, in a place that his species had evolved beyond long ago. Ambassador Xyrith felt something he had not experienced in centuries. It took him a moment to recognize the emotion. It was doubt, and the space between worlds. In the darkness that separated the conclave station from the blue planet below, something was beginning to stir. Something that the 12 empires had never encountered in all their millennia of conquest. Humanity was waking up, and humanity was angry. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a bunker that officially did not exist, Admiral Helena Vance stood before a wall of screens that showed the alien armada descending through Earth's atmosphere. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines on her face that spoke of decades of difficult decisions. But her eyes were steady, and her voice was calm as she addressed the room full of military leaders from every nation on Earth. "They are landing in 12 cities simultaneously," she said, pointing to the red markers on the global display: New York, London, Beijing, Moscow, Tokyo, Sydney, Cairo, Mumbai, Sao Paulo. Lagos, Berlin, and Los Angeles. They expect to find terrified civilians and disorganized resistance. They expect us to surrender or scatter. They expect this to be easy. General Chun Wei of the Chinese People's Liberation Army stood beside her, his uniform crisp despite the tension in the room. Next to him was General Alexander Volkov of Russia, and beside Volkov stood General James Morrison of the United States. And around them gathered the highest-ranking military officers from every major nation on the planet. These were men and women who had spent their careers preparing to fight each other. Their countries had nuclear weapons pointed at each other's capitals. Their intelligence agencies had spent decades stealing secrets from one another. Their soldiers had clashed in proxy wars across the globe. None of that mattered anymore. Prometheus is ready, Admiral Vance continued, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface. We've been preparing for this moment since we first detected their signals 30 years ago. Every nation in this room has contributed to the project, setting aside our differences in secret while maintaining the appearance of conflict for any observers. The aliens have been watching us fight each other, and they believed it was all we were capable of. They were wrong. She pressed a command and the display changed, showing a network of satellites orbiting Earth. To alien sensors, these satellites appeared to be simple communication relays. Primitive technology barely worth noticing. But the display now revealed their true nature, orbital weapons platforms, Vance explained. Each one carrying enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The aliens dismissed them because they looked harmless, because they did not match any weapon signatures in their databases. We designed them that way. We made them look weak on purpose. General Morrison spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of a man who was about to send soldiers into the most important battle in human history. The evacuation is complete. We moved 12 million people out of the target cities in under 3 hours. The aliens will land expecting to take hostages, expecting human shields, expecting leverage. They will find empty streets and prepared kill zones. Admiral Vance nodded, allowing herself a small smile that held no warmth. They called us weak because we fight among ourselves, but they do not understand what that means. We fight among ourselves because we are predators, because conflict is in our nature, because we evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day. Every war we have ever fought has been practice. Every weapon we have ever built has been a prototype. We are the most dangerous thing our planet ever produced. And now we finally have something worthy to hunt. The screen showed the alien landing ships touching down in the empty cities. Massive vessels that made human aircraft look like toys. Armored doors opened and alien soldiers began to pour out. Thousands of them, each one larger and stronger than any human. Each one carrying weapons that could vaporize a tank with a single shot. They marched through the streets expecting screams and chaos instead. They found silence. The first sign of trouble came when a Valkyrie squad leader noticed the buildings. Around them were not quite right. The windows were dark, the doors were sealed, and there was a strange smell in the air. Something chemical that their sensors could not identify. Report, the squad leader ordered, his crystal body shifting to a cautious yellow color. Where are the inhabitants? His answer came in the form of an explosion that turned the street into a river of fire across the 12 cities. The trap sprung shut at exactly the same moment. Buildings that had been rigged with explosives collapsed onto alien formations. Streets that had been mined erupted into chaos. And from hidden positions in the rubble emerged human soldiers wearing armor that the aliens had never seen before. The armor was crude by galactic standards. Just reinforced plates and sealed helmets, but it was covered in a substance that scattered alien targeting systems, making the humans appear as ghosts on their sensors. The weapons the humans carried were equally primitive. Kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives, but they had been designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Volcari crystal physiology. Aliens had shared their technology freely among the Conclave members, never imagining that a primitive species might intercept their communications and study their biology. They had broadcast their specifications across the stars, confident that no one beneath their notice could understand. Humanity had understood, humanity had prepared in Beijing. A Valkyrie commander watched in disbelief as his soldiers fell one by one. The humans were not fighting like a frightened prey species. They were fighting like wolves, coordinated and relentless, striking from shadows and disappearing before retaliation could find them. They were supposed to be weak, the commander transmitted to the orbiting fleet, his voice cracking with something that might have been fear. They were supposed to surrender. Why are they not surrendering? Above Earth's atmosphere, Admiral Vance's fleet was engaging the Conclave Armada. Human ships were smaller and slower and less advanced than their alien counterparts, crewed by pilots who had trained in secret for years. Flying vessels that had been built in hidden shipyards beneath the oceans. Aliens expected the human ships to keep their distance, to fight cautiously, to retreat when outmatched instead. The humans flew directly at them. The first ramming attack caught the Valkyrie flagship completely off guard. A human cruiser, its hull already burning from alien weapons fire, accelerated to maximum speed and drove itself straight into the flagship's engine section. The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a new star, and in the aftermath, 2,000 Valkyrie crew members were dead. More attacks followed, human pilots laughing as they died, broadcasting music and poetry and defiant messages as their ships became missiles. One pilot sang an ancient song about freedom while his vessel tore through an alien carrier. Another quoted a philosopher who had lived 3,000 years ago. Words about standing against impossible odds. The aliens had conquered hundreds of worlds, but they had never encountered anything like this. They had never fought a species that was not afraid to die in the Hall of Judgment. Ambassador Zereth watched the battle unfold on his displays, his crystal form cycling through colors he could not control. This was not possible. This was not how conquest worked. Primitive species were supposed to collapse when faced with superior force. They were supposed to break and submit and accept their place in the natural order. What are they? He whispered, watching a human soldier continue fighting even after losing an arm. Watching a human pilot fly into certain death with a smile on his face. Watching a species that should have surrendered instead chose to burn. No one in the chamber had an answer down on Earth. Admiral Vance received reports from every theater of battle. The ground forces were winning, pushing the alien invaders back toward their landing ships. And the orbital fleet was holding its own despite catastrophic losses. They thought we were weak because we are mortal, she said quietly, watching the lights flicker on her displays as human lives winked out one by one. They do not understand that mortality is our greatest weapon. We have nothing to lose because we were already dying. Every human who has ever lived knew that death was waiting. We have had 1,000 generations to make peace with oblivion. She looked at the generals around her. Men and women who had been enemies and were now brothers and sisters in arms. And she saw no fear in their eyes. They wanted a weak species to harvest, she said, her voice rising like thunder. Let us show them what weakness really looks like. And across the burning cities of Earth, humanity roared its answer to the stars. Commander Terex of the Valkyrie 4th Legion had conquered 11 worlds before coming to Earth. He had faced enemies with superior numbers, enemies with desperate courage, enemies who fought to the last soldier rather than accept defeat. He thought he understood war in all its forms, thought he had seen every kind of resistance a species could offer. He was wrong. The humans had been chasing his remaining forces through the ruins of London for 6 hours now. 6 hours of constant movement, constant vigilance, constant fear. His soldiers were exhausted. their crystal bodies dimming as their energy reserves depleted. But every time they tried to rest, every time they thought they have found a safe position, the humans appeared again. They should be tired. Terex transmitted to his surviving officers, his voice carrying a tremor he could not hide. Biological organisms require rest. Their bodies should be failing. Why do they keep coming? The answer came from the Legion's chief analyst, a younger Valkyrie, whose crystal form had turned a sickly gray from stress. Commander, I have been studying their biology in our databases. The humans are what their planet calls persistence predators. Their ancestors did not hunt by being faster or stronger than their prey. They hunted by following their targets until those targets collapsed from exhaustion. They can maintain pursuit for days without stopping. They were designed by evolution to never give up. Terex felt his core temperature drop as the implications became clear. His species was powerful, but required regular rest cycles to maintain their crystalline structure. They could fight for hours, but eventually they needed to stop, to regenerate. To recover, the humans needed no such thing. They just kept coming in the shadows of the ruined city. Sergeant Maria Santos led her squad through streets that had become hunting grounds. She had been fighting for almost 20 hours straight, her body running on adrenaline and determination, and she felt more alive than she had ever felt in her life. "Contact ahead," whispered Private Johnson, pointing toward a damaged building where crystalline shapes flickered in the darkness. "Looks like a command element." "Maybe 15 hostiles?" Santos nodded and began signaling to her squad with hand gestures. They had learned early in the battle that the aliens could intercept radio communications, so they had fallen back on methods that humanity had used for thousands of years. Silent signals, written notes, runners carrying messages. Primitive but effective, the squad moved like ghosts through the rubble, each soldier knowing their role without needing to be told. Humanity had been fighting wars since before they learned to write, and that experience was encoded in their blood, passed down through generations of warriors who had faced impossible odds and survived. The Valkyrie never saw them coming. The attack was swift and brutal. Santos herself took down the commander with a blade made from an alloy that human scientists had developed specifically to shatter alien crystal. She watched the light fade from his form and felt nothing but grim satisfaction. "They keep calling us weak," she said to her squad as they collected alien weapons and prepared to move on. "They keep asking why we do not surrender. They do not understand that surrender was never an option. They do not understand that we would rather die free than live as slaves." Across the battlefields of Earth, similar scenes played out as human soldiers demonstrated capabilities that the Conclave had never anticipated. In Moscow, a group of defenders held a bridge for 12 hours against overwhelming force, falling back only when ordered to, leaving behind a mountain of alien dead. In Tokyo, civilians who had refused evacuation fought alongside soldiers, using improvised weapons and homemade explosives to turn every building into a fortress. The aliens had expected shock and awe to break human resistance. Instead, shock and awe had awakened something ancient and terrible in the human spirit, something that had been sleeping during the long peace of the modern era. They do not fight like rational beings. High Sovereign tracks transmitted from the orbital station, his compound eyes fixed on the tactical displays with something approaching horror. "When we destroy one of their units, the survivors do not retreat. They attack more fiercely. When we kill their leaders, new leaders emerge immediately. Their command structure is not hierarchical. It is like fighting a swarm that thinks." Synthesis Prime's mechanical voice responded, carrying an undertone of genuine concern. "Analysis indicates that human social evolution favored extreme adaptability. They can form functional organizations spontaneously, without central direction. Each human is capable of independent decision-making while simultaneously coordinating with others. This is not a weakness as we assumed. This is an emergent strength that we failed to account for. The machine intelligence paused, processing vast amounts of battlefield data before continuing. Furthermore, their emotional responses appeared to enhance rather than impair their combat effectiveness. The rage they feel at our invasion is being channeled into focused aggression. The grief they feel at losing comrades becomes fuel for continued resistance. They have evolved to transform psychological trauma into physical action. They are not irrational. They are operating on a different type of logic than we anticipated. Ambassador Zireth listened to these analyses with growing disbelief. His people had conquered dozens of species across thousands of years, and they had developed models for predicting how civilizations would respond to invasion. Some species fought briefly, then submitted. Others fled and scattered. A few destroyed themselves rather than face conquest. None had ever responded like this. Why do they not fear death? He demanded, his crystal form now blazing with frustrated red light. Every sentient species fears extinction. It is a universal constant. Survival is the primary drive of all living things. These humans throw away their lives as if they mean nothing. A new voice entered the conversation. The ancient rumble of Elder Kothmer, oldest of the Kethmari representatives. He had been silent throughout the battle, observing with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall for millennia. You misunderstand them. Young Zireth, Kothmer said, his voice carrying the weight of ages. The humans do not throw away their lives because those lives mean nothing. They sacrifice themselves because their lives mean everything. I have been studying their transmissions, their art, their history. They are a species haunted by the knowledge of their own mortality. Every human knows from childhood that they will die. This awareness should crush them. But instead, they have built entire philosophies around defying death. The elder gestured toward the displays showing human soldiers advancing into certain doom. Look at them. They are not fighting for survival. They know they cannot survive. They are fighting for meaning. They want their deaths to matter. They want to be remembered. For them, a glorious death in battle against impossible odds is not tragedy. It is triumph. We offered them slavery, and they chose to become legends instead. Zireth stared at the displays, watching a human pilot broadcast a message to his family before diving his burning ship into a Valkyrie troop transport. Watching soldiers hold hands as they detonated explosives beneath their own feet to take enemy commanders with them. Watching medics drag wounded comrades to safety while bleeding from their own wounds. They are insane, he whispered. No, Elder Kothmer replied quietly. They are human. And we have made a terrible mistake. Below, on the surface of Earth, Commander Terex made his final transmission as Santos and her squad closed in on his position. He had lost contact with his fleet, lost contact with his fellow commanders, lost everything except a handful of soldiers who would soon join him in death. To any Conclave forces receiving this message, he said, his crystal voice trembling with emotions he had never experienced before, do not underestimate the humans. They are not weak. They have never been weak. Their conflicts, their short lives, their fragile bodies. These are not disadvantages. These are the crucible that forged them into something we cannot comprehend. They have been preparing for a fight like this since the first human picked up a stone and refused to run from a predator. He paused as shadows moved in the darkness around him. Human shapes closing in with weapons raised. They were not waiting for us. Terex concluded. We were the ones they were waiting for. And now they finally have something worthy of their wrath. The transmission ended in static and somewhere in the ruins of London. Sergeant Maria Santos allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before moving on to the next target. There was still work to do. The battle for Earth ended 12 hours after it began. The Valkyrie Expeditionary Force was destroyed. Their landing ships burning wreckage scattered across 12 cities. Their soldiers either dead or captured, their commanders silenced forever. It was the fastest defeat of a conclave military force in recorded history. And it sent shockwaves through the galactic community that will be felt for generations. But Admiral Helena Vance was not satisfied. She stood in the command center of the captured Valkyrie flagship, a vessel that human engineers had seized during the orbital battle and were now working frantically to understand. The ship systems were beyond anything humanity had ever built. Technology that should have taken centuries to develop. But human scientists were making progress at a rate that alarmed even Vance herself. The faster-than-light drive is based on principles we theorized but never proved, reported Dr. Sarah Chun, the lead physicist on the reverse engineering team. With the data from their systems, we can build our own version in weeks, maybe days if we push hard enough. The Valkyrie were arrogant. They did not encrypt their technical databases. They assumed no primitive species could understand their science. Vance nodded, her eyes fixed on the holographic star chart that now filled the center of the room. It showed the locations of all 12 conclave homeworlds, marking the centers of power for civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They came to our world and declared us weak, she said quietly. They came to our home and threatened our children, our families, our entire species. They thought we would accept their judgment and submit to their will. They were wrong about us once. Let us make sure they never have the chance to be wrong again. General Morrison stepped forward, his uniform stained with dust and blood from the battles he had commanded. Admiral, we have volunteers. Thousands of them. Soldiers who want to take this fight to the enemy. They know it is likely a one-way trip. They do not care. They want the aliens to understand what happens when you threaten Earth. Not just soldiers, added General Chen Wei. Scientists, engineers, pilots. Everyone wants to be part of what comes next. Humanity has never been this unified. The world is watching, and they all want to send the same message. Vance turned to face the gathered leaders, men and women who represented every nation on Earth, every culture, every language. They had come together to defend their world, and now they would go together to ensure no one ever threatened it again. The Conclave has ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, she said, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. They have conquered hundreds of species and absorbed dozens of civilizations. They believed they were invincible because no one had ever challenged them. No one had ever hit them back. Today, that changes. She activated the holographic display and began outlining targets. The Valkyrie Dominion is the most aggressive of the 12 empires. Their homeworld is here, in the crystalline systems. They have minimal defenses because they have never needed them. No one has ever been stupid enough to attack them. A grim chuckle went through the room. The Synthex hegemony is ruled by artificial intelligences that believe organic life is inferior. Their central processing core is located on a station in orbit around a dead star. Our cyber warfare teams have developed viruses based on captured Valkyrie code that should be compatible with their systems. She continued through the list, identifying weaknesses in empires that had grown complacent over millennia of unchallenged dominance. The Kathmari breeding pools, sacred sites that the insectoid race would do anything to protect. The merchant guilds of the Thracian Combine, whose economic networks could be disrupted by targeted strikes. The military installations of the warrior races who had not fought a real war in generations. We cannot conquer them, Vance admitted. We do not have the numbers or the resources for a prolonged war. But we do not need to conquer them. We need to hurt them. We need to make them understand that attacking Earth has consequences. We need to burn their arrogance to ash within 72 hours. Humanity launched its counterattack strike teams composed entirely of volunteers departed. Earth aboard captured and modified alien vessels. Crews who knew they were unlikely to return, but who went anyway, driven by rage and pride and a determination that the galaxy would never forget. They carried weapons that human scientists had built in days. Terrible things designed to cause maximum damage. Antimatter devices and biological agents and computer viruses that could eat through alien systems like acid. The first target was the Velkari homeworld, a planet of living crystal that had stood unconquered for 8,000 years. Ambassador Zareth was in his private chambers when the alarms began, and he rushed to his balcony just in time to see human ships screaming through the atmosphere like falling stars. Impossible, he whispered as explosions bloomed across the crystal spires of his capital city. How are they here? They were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to be weak. His answer came in the form of a transmission that overrode every communication system on the planet. Admiral Vance's face appeared on screens across the Velkari Dominion. Calm and cold and utterly without mercy, "You came to our world and declared us unworthy," she said. "You threatened to harvest our children and enslave our people. You called us weak because we are mortal, because we fight, because we break. But you missed the truth. Everything we have ever built, we built knowing we would die. Every song, every story, every act of love or war. All of it was defiance against the void. Behind her, through the windows of her command ship, the crystal towers of the Velkari capital burned. You cannot frighten a species that has stared into oblivion since the day it first looked up at the stars and understood its own insignificance." Vance continued, "We are not weak. We are desperate. And there is nothing in this universe more dangerous." The transmission ended, and the destruction continued across the galaxy. Similar scenes played out as humanity's vengeance reached out to touch the empires that had sanctioned Earth's harvesting. The Syntax hegemony's central core was infected with viruses that turned their own systems against them. Eyes that had believed themselves superior to organic life, suddenly discovering that organic minds could create chaos beyond their ability to process. The Kethmari sacred pools were contaminated with agents that would render them sterile for generations. A wound to their civilization that would never fully heal. The Thracian Combine's trade networks collapsed as human hackers infiltrated their systems and deleted centuries of economic records. The warrior races found their military bases burning, struck by enemies who appeared from nowhere and vanished before retaliation could arrive. And everywhere, on every world that had voted to harvest Earth, the message was the same. This is what happens when you threaten humanity. Ambassador Zareth fled his burning homeworld, aboard a personal cruiser, watching everything he had known disappear into fire and smoke. Around him, the remnants of the Conclave fleet scrambled to respond to attacks happening across dozens of star systems simultaneously. How is this possible? He demanded of his surviving staff. They were a primitive species 3 days ago. How did they become this? No one had an answer. The truth was that humanity had not become anything. They had simply revealed what they had always been. A species forged in the fires of constant struggle, tempered by millions of years of evolution on a world that showed no mercy, driven by an awareness of mortality that made every moment precious and every threat existential. The aliens had looked at humanity's conflicts and seen weakness. They should have seen practice. They had looked at humanity's short lives and seen fragility. They should have seen urgency. They had looked at humanity's divisions and seen chaos. They should have seen diversity. Now they were learning the truth. Written in fire across their homeworlds, spoken in the screams of their dying soldiers. Carved into the very fabric of their ancient civilizations, humanity was not weak humanity. Had just been waiting for a worthy opponent, and now that opponent was burning. 1 year had passed since the day the Galactic Conclave declared humanity weak, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The 12 empires that had ruled the stars for 10,000 years were broken. Their power shattered, their arrogance burned to ash. Some had surrendered completely, their leaders begging for mercy from the species they had once dismissed as primitives. Others had been dismantled piece by piece, their military forces destroyed, their economic networks collapsed, their populations left to rebuild from the ruins of their former glory. The Hall of Judgment, once the center of galactic power, now served as the meeting place for a new organization. The Galactic Assembly, composed of representatives from over 300 species, many of whom had been conquered or oppressed by the Conclave for millennia. They had watched in amazement as humanity tore down the old order. And now they gathered to see what would rise in its place. Ambassador Helena Vance, formerly Admiral of the Earth Defense Fleet and now First Speaker of the Terran Confederation, stood at the center of the chamber. She wore a simple uniform without medals or decorations, having refused all honors offered by the grateful nations of Earth. The only acknowledgement of her service was a small patch on her shoulder, showing a blue planet against a field of stars around her. The delegates of 300 species watched with a mixture of emotions: fear and respect, hatred and hope, curiosity and caution. Humanity had proven itself capable of terrible destruction, had shown that it could burn empires and topple civilizations. And now the galaxy waited to see what such a species would do with its newfound power. 1 year ago, Vance began, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. The Galactic Conclave came to Earth and told us we were weak. They looked at our divided nations and saw chaos. They looked at our short lives and saw insignificance. They looked at our fragile bodies and saw victims waiting to be harvested. They were wrong. She paused, letting her gaze move across the assembled delegates. Some met her eyes, others looked away, and a few trembled visibly in their seats. We did not want this war, she continued. We would have been content to remain on our small blue world, fighting our small wars, living our brief lives in the corner of the galaxy that we called home. We did not dream of conquest or empire. We only wanted to be left alone. But the Conclave would not allow that. They forced our hand. They taught us that the universe is not kind to the weak. And so we chose to stop being weak. Elder Kothmer of the Kethmari, one of the few Conclave leaders who had survived the Year of Fire, listened with ancient eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. He had been right about the humans, had tried to warn his colleagues about the danger they represented, but his warnings had gone unheeded. Now he served as an advisor to the new assembly, trying to help his people navigate a galaxy that had been turned upside down. The humans are not conquerors, he had told the younger delegates before the assembly convened. They are gardeners. They do not want to rule the galaxy. They want to cultivate it. Watch and listen, and you will see. Vance continued her address, her voice softening slightly. We learned something during this war, something important. We learned that we do not want to be alone. For all of our history, we have looked up at the stars and wondered if there was anyone else out there, anyone who could understand us, anyone who could share our joys and sorrows and dreams. The Conclave told us we were not worthy of joining the galactic community. But they were wrong about that too. She gestured toward the assembled delegates. Hundreds of different species representing thousands of different worlds. Look at this room. I see beings of crystal and beings of flesh. I see minds of silicon and minds of chemistry. I see species that breathe oxygen and species that breathe methane and species that do not breathe at all. Every one of you is different from us, and every one of you is precious. The Conclave saw diversity as chaos. We see it as strength. A murmur went through the chamber as delegates exchanged glances. This was not the speech they had expected. They had prepared for demands and threats, for a new order imposed by force, for humanity to become the next Conclave. Instead, they were hearing something else entirely. "Here is our offer," Vance said, her voice rising. "Join us. Not as subjects, not as servants, not as conquered peoples grateful for mercy. Join us as partners, as equals, as fellow travelers on the long journey through the stars. Help us become better than we are. Teach us your wisdom and let us share ours. Build with us a galaxy where no species is harvested, where no civilization is dismissed as weak, where every world has a voice and every people has dignity." She paused again, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an edge of steel. "But understand this as well. We remember what was done to us. We remember the judgment of the conclave, the arrogance of the empires, the threat to our children and our world. We have shown you what we are capable of when threatened. We have demonstrated that we can burn civilizations and break empires. That capacity has not gone away. We have simply chosen not to use it." The chamber was absolutely silent now, every delegate hanging on her words. "We want to be builders," Vance said. "We want to be creators and explorers and dreamers. We want to fill the galaxy with life and laughter and hope. But if anyone, ever, threatens Earth or its people again, if anyone tries to harvest or enslave or destroy our species, we will remind them of what we did to the conclave. We will show them that the fire that burned 12 empires still burns in human hearts." She looked out at the assembly, at beings who had once ruled the stars and beings who had once been slaves, at ancient civilizations and young species taking their first steps beyond their homeworlds. "The choice is yours," she concluded. "You can be our partners, or you can be our enemies. You can build with us, or you can burn like those who threatened us. We prefer peace. We prefer cooperation. We prefer a friendship. But we will not beg for it. We will not plead for acceptance. We are human, and we have learned our worth." The silence stretched for a long moment, and then Elder Kothmer rose from his seat. His ancient body moved slowly, worn by years of stress and grief. But his voice was strong as he spoke. "The Kathmari accept your offer," he said, bowing his massive insectoid head. "We judged you wrongly, and we have paid for that judgment. Let us now build something worthy of the price we both have paid." One by one, other delegates rose and voiced their acceptance. Species that had been enemies for millennia stood together and pledged themselves to the new order. Former masters and former slaves shook hands and clasped claws and touched tentacles in gestures of unity. Ambassador Zyrith watched from the back of the chamber, his crystal form dulled by the losses he had suffered, his arrogance burned away by the fire that had consumed his homeworld. He had been allowed to attend as an observer, a representative of a people who were rebuilding from ashes. He remembered his words from a year ago, words that had seemed so reasonable at the time. He had called the humans weak, had dismissed them as primitives, had voted to harvest their world without a second thought. Now he watched as those same humans offered peace and partnership to a galaxy that had wronged them. As they chose to build rather than destroy, as they demonstrated a capacity for mercy that the conclave had never possessed. "They are remarkable," he whispered to himself. "They truly are remarkable." And as the Galactic Assembly continued its historic session, as hundreds of species began the long process of building a new civilization from the ruins of the old, humanity looked up at the stars with new eyes. They were no longer alone, they were no longer afraid, they were no longer weak, they were human, and that was enough.